I apologize for the hiatus. It's getting a little more difficult to navigate these city streets after dark. When last we spoke of Yuka in hushed tones in this humble room, she had just witnessed a friend being gravely injured. And now we see what happens next. Yuka did not even remember picking Annui up. She had rolled the bright-haired girl over and looked into her pain-widened eyes. Annui had cried out once, but then her eyes had rolled back into her head, and she had lain still. Yuka's eyes could not leave the girl's snow-white face. She felt as though she could not focus. Her mind was racing in every direction. It was not until Lusa's words had registered that she felt the weight of Annui in her arms. Annui felt as light as a babe. "Yuka, damn it all, give her to me." Lusa remained on her mount. I can take her." Yuka's heart felt like it was vibrating in her chest. "We need to get her back to camp, and you do not ride well enough to carry her with you. There is no time, damn you." Lusa's tone finally sunk through Yuka's stupor. She lifted Annui into Lusa's arms. As she did, she felt a cold wetness spread across her chest from the rising wind. Looking down, Yuka saw that the chest of her coat was covered in bright red blood. Her knees almost buckled at the sight. Lusa was already riding hard down the hill, towards the swirling trails of smoke in the tree line ahead. Yuka ran to her own mount. The restless animal seemed to smell the blood on Yuka and backed away, shaking its head at her touch. Caring little for the animal's fear now, Yuka pulled hard on the stirrups and pulled herself atop the mount. Digging her heels once more into the animal's flanks, Yuka rode hard after Lusa. She looked over her shoulder once, seeing Annui's abandoned mount. Beyond it, two jailers had their spitfires drawn and were riding warily back the way their party had come. They were looking around wildly. Through the cloud of her erratic thoughts, Yuka wondered if they would find who had fired. Turning her mind back to camp and Annui, Yuka rode towards the camp. She knew which wagon to look for. In a wide, flat expanse of snow and rock, the caravan's camp was being set up for the night. A few scarred jailers patrolled the edge of the camp on foot. At a hail from Lusa, Yuka saw them let her pass. By then, she had made it only a few strides behind Lusa, and the jailers did not challenge her as she passed. Lusa was calling out the name that had been screamed in Yuka's mind since the shot had rang out. "Margrave! Margrave!" Lusa rode to the center of the camp. She called out to one of the brown-garbed servant boys who pointed to the far edge of the caravan. Lusa urged her horse onward into camp, nearly running over two of the white-robed women as she made it to Margrave's wagon. Yuka followed. Margrave had not yet set up his tent fully. When they found him, he was still unloading several boxes from his wagon when Lusa got to him. He looked up, squinting. Lusa was spitting a cascade of words in Kamden. Margrave's demeanor turned as he saw what was in Lusa's arms. He jumped from his wagon and replied. His words were calm, but direct. He reached up to Lusa, and the woman carefully lifted Annui into his arms. The man's small, muscular arms effortlessly hefted the child and carried her towards the wagon. By now, half of the camp was drawing around to look at the spectacle. Margrave shouted gruffly to a gray-haired jailer and one of the brown-clad servant boys. Both ran to his wagon and removed a small, low-hanging cot that they brought to lay down before him. Margrave gingerly laid the still-moaning girl onto the cloth bed. Yuka could see red covering most of the top half of Annui's body, but she could not see where the wound was. Margrave began shouting commands to all in the camp that were near. Every word was in Kamden, but Yuka watched as nearly a dozen bystanders acted on his words. All around, men were bringing him boxes of his tools, laying the tarp for the tent floor, and grabbing small bits of furniture from his wagon, and setting up his tent around him while he worked. Yuka moved to help those that were erecting his tent. Stakes were hammered into the ground, and ropes that were run through the thick canvas were tied to them. Yuka helped tie the ropes around each of the stakes. Just as Yuka rose from the last stake, a great trumpeting sound blew out across the camp. She turned and saw all who had gathered around them part like water against rock, for the great form of Falhurst riding his enormous mount. Yuka could tell, in the dying light of day, that the man's steed was lathered and panting from hard riding. 4 jailers riding similar mounts came from behind the caravan's leader. Falhurst vaulted from his saddle, landing deftly on the ground at speed, moving like a man considerably younger than he was. He immediately ran through the healer's erected tent flap. Yuka felt her legs carry herself immediately behind the man. She was the only one of the rest of the party that had moved. She heard Lusa call her name once behind her, but she ignored her. Inside the tent, candles had been lit on small stands and tables all around the cot that Annui laid upon. A small iron cage-looking thing had been placed next to the cot. Nestled in the cage was a small pile of burning coals. The room was very warm and quiet, save for the soft, labored breathing of the wounded girl. Yuka felt her heartstrings tugged in every direction, looking down at her. Annui's eyes were closed, and there was a thin sheen of sweat over her brow. Margrave had cut her coat from around her as well as the shirt below. Yuka could now see that the ball from the Spitfire had torn into her left shoulder. The black hole was weeping blood into the cloth of the small cot. Margrave was uncorking a small glass bottle and carefully pouring its contents between Annui's lips. When Falhurst spoke, it sounded like rocks crackling under ice. Margrave did not respond for a moment. He seemed to be concentrating. Falhurst, still seeming to be oblivious of Yuka's presence, bellowed Margrave's name after a moment of silence. Margrave did not jump at the sudden shout. He turned to look up at Falhurst. He removed his black glass eyewear from his eyes, sliding them up to rest on his bald head. He responded to the big, bearded man in soft, level tones. With a long, sharp instrument in his hand, he pointed to the hole in Annui's arm. Falhurst growled something back, and Margrave gave a small shrug and a shake of his head. "You need to leave now." Yuka heard the whispered words before she felt the chill from the shifted tent flap. She turned to see Lusa reaching for her from outside. Yuka heard an angry word suddenly spat from Falhurst. Almost immediately, she felt 2 massive hands grip the front of her coat. With a great yank, Yuka was pulled from her feet and lifted from the ground. Turning from Lusa, she met the sky-gray eyes of Falhurst. These 2 small glimmers of sky held fire for her as Falhurst shouted a string of words that Yuka did not understand. Yuka shook her head, not knowing what was meant by this. She could hear Lusa shouting something in Kamden. Falhurst bellowed something and threw Yuka bodily from the tent. She landed hard on the cold snow-covered ground in front of the growing crowd around the tent. All of the wind from her lungs was shot back towards the sky. Coughing, her vision blurred slightly, Yuka watched as Falhurst emerged from the tent flap. His hand shot to his side, and he withdrew a curved blade, nearly as long as her leg, from a sheath under his red cloak. His eyes held a deep, murderous gaze as he advanced on Yuka. Lusa stepped in front of him. Holding both arms in front of her, she spoke quickly, gesturing to both Yuka and the tent behind Falhurst as she did so. Falhurst replied with his own angry words, raising his blade to point at Yuka. Lusa remained rooted to her spot. "What does he want?" Yuka called behind Lusa. She could feel every suspicious eye on her from the camp around. Lusa did not answer. She did not step aside for Falhurst either, but raised her hands higher and spoke fervently. Falhurst stared at Yuka for a long while, but blinked and turned to Lusa at the last of her words. He glanced back at the girl that he had thrown to the ground. Yuka could swear that for a moment she saw a small flicker of guilt past his face. With an angry outburst of noise, Falhurst went back into the tent, leaving Lusa standing where she was, Yuka prone on the ground, and 100 eyes still staring at all of them. He thought that you would hurt Annui. Why? The blood on your coat, and his own bull-headed anger. Lusa finally turned around. Come on now, girl. Get up. Lusa lowered a hand and helped Yuka to her feet. Are you hurt? In truth, the force of being thrown bodily to the ground had sent a stab of pain through Yuka's still healing ribs, but she shook her head. I've had worse. I don't doubt it. Come, girl. Lusa jerked her head towards the far end of camp and began walking away from Margrave's healer's tent. Yuka stayed rooted to the spot. Snow had begun falling overhead and was thickening once more. The sun had fallen fully over the horizon. The world around was dark and cold. Yuka's eyes were locked on the small bit of candlelight peeking through the healer's tent flap. Let Margrave to his work. With me, Yuka. You could use a warm drink right now. The green sings that I could too. Yuka felt a hand on her shoulder as Lusa guided her away from the tent. The walk from the camp was dreamlike for Yuka. The snow veiled all of the quick-moving shadows around them as the patrons of the caravan scurried to get their shelters fixed and their meals warmed for the night. Yuka barely took in any of these surroundings as she walked alongside Lusa. There was a twist in her belly that tightened with every thought of the agony that Annui must be going through right now. Lusa's tent was already raised by some unseen servant. A small cook fire and an iron cooking stand had been set under a wide tarp and was crackling merrily in front of the tent. Pull up a stump and sit. We'll have a drink before bedding down for the night, Lusa said over her shoulder as she disappeared into the tent. Yuka set her bedroll pack down and warmed her hands by the fire. Looking around, she saw no stumps nearby, but there was a thin, wide rock that had been smoothed to almost flat over time a few paces away. Yuka dusted off the snow and slid the rock near to the fire. As she settled herself on top of it, Lusa emerged from the tent, holding a brass kettle and a large clay jug of something. She set the kettle onto the cooking stand and poured a generous amount of the jug's contents into the kettle. More of that black Kamden tea? Yuka asked. Lusa half smiled. Far from it, girl. This concoction is not meant to wake your mind. Yuka could already smell a sweet, fruity aroma rising in the steam from the kettle. The chill that was settling into her bones from the night ebbed a little. Lusa sighed. I know your heart is heavy, thinking of that bright little girl. Take heart in the knowledge that Margrave is the only one from the southern lands that I have ever seen heal like a greeneress. The man has a wisdom and magic about him that has shocked even me more than once. Lusa shifted in her place on the ground. Besides, on this dark night, you and I have other matters to discuss. Out of Lusa's pocket came the same two clay mugs that Yuka had drunk tea from that morning. Lusa grasped the handle of the kettle with a gloved hand and poured a generous amount of the sweet, steaming liquid into each of their cups. There now, let it rest for a moment, then take a sip. I swear by the wind that you'll feel a little better. Yuka watched the steam rise from the cup for a long moment before taking a sip. It was the sweetest fire that she had ever tasted. The tang of a dozen fruits and the spice of 100 herbs filled her senses. As the warm drink went down her throat and settled in her belly, Yuka felt her head begin to swim slightly. It was a similar feeling as to when she had taken 3 or 4 pulls on the skin of hennifer wine. Kamden wassail. Never was there a drink more loving, nor more dangerous. Dangerous? Yuka asked after another sip. Lusa nodded. After a whole skin of hennifer wine, I have a mind to sing and dance in the moonlight. After 3 cups of this stuff, I am convinced that I can fly. Yuka chuckled in spite of herself and took another sip of the drink. She felt the tight knot in her belly begin to loosen slightly. I want to hear a story, girl, Lusa said over the crackling fire. A story? The story of how a girl with a hair the color of blood, the daughter of a greeneress in the copper shards, has etched in the flesh of her face the kankin of the deep mother's black faith. I also want to know why the name of the same girl is spoken with familiarity by a villager in lands so very far from the Black North and even farther from where the girl was born. And most important of all, I want to know why this girl was found alone, battered and bloody next to a dead fell cat in a forest where the wicked paint their faces white and murder without mercy. Yuka felt her pulse quicken with every word from Lusa. The sweet haze of the strong drink waned slightly. She took another small sip, mainly to delay having to speak. How many do I want knowing my story, she thought. Do I bring danger to those I had traveled with before by telling this woman who rides with foreigners? Yuka suddenly felt the weight of all she had held in these last few days. amidst all that was happening around her. She felt a deep, appalling longing to be near Aglu again, to see her father and smell the safe scents of smelting bronze, stone goat soup, and warpine trees once more. I am so very far away from all those things now, she knew. With all that had happened, I could very well never experience those joys again. She also knew that at the very least she could never again hear Aglu's booming laugh, or feel her warm embrace. I gave her to the green on the wind. I did what I could. The thought did not comfort her. Aglu would have liked this warrior woman of the green, she thought. Yuka took a long, calming sigh. There is a rite, a way of passage for women in the far north, along the coast of the northmost shores with the blackest water and the coldest skies. Lusa gazed at Yuka through the crackling sparks of their cook fire and the steam from her wassail cup. I know of it, she said, swimming the black, dancing with the deep mother. I've heard the stories. She squinted at Yuka for a moment, then her eyebrows raised. You swam with the lurkers. Yuka nodded. For the briefest of moments, she remembered clearly the feeling of the piercing cold of the water on her flesh and the fearful chill in her gut that something great and terrible swam below her. She brought herself close to the fire and took another sip of wassail. Why? Lusa asked. Why would a child of the green cliffs of the copper shards go so far north to brave a dark belief that was not her own by birth? Have you ever had a Nightheart? Yuka looked up at Lusa. The older warrior woman looked taken aback by the question. I have braved harsh winters with a number of people. Many have shared my bedroll. I have made no fathers, and there was never a woman I met that I felt close enough to call that. Why ask me that, girl? My mother had a Nightheart, before making my father hers. She was a salt sister of the far north, a respected woman in her village on the western coves. They spent 3 winters together just after my mother had earned the right of greeneress. Did you ever meet her? Lusa refilled both of their cups until they were once more brimming with wassail. Yuka shook her head. She died of cold lung, the summer before my mother met my father. I did not even know she existed until my mother was breathing her last. For a moment, Yuka fell silent. Her mind drifted back to the last song that her mother ever sang on the wind, before she was given back to the green. The Song of the Swimming Tree. By now, most of the camp had bedded down for the night around them. The silence grew between Yuka and Lusa. For a long while, it was only pierced by the whispers of the snow and the crackles of the flames between them. Tell me, Lusa said softly, all of it. Yuka took a deep breath, but before she could say another word, a loud shot rang out in the black. Shouts followed the noise, and Lusa rose from her seat by the fire, tossing the strong Kamden wassail into the flames. Yuka did the same. People all around them were peeking their heads out of the tents. Yuka could see torchlights sprouting out all around the camp. What's going on? As Yuka rose from the fire, she felt her head swim slightly from the strong drink. She righted herself and took long, deep breaths of the snowy winter air. Lusa tied her coat strings tight and hurried into the night. Yuka followed. She heard more shouts and saw riders up ahead. What are they saying? She called out through the snow. They found them. They're saying they found the ones who shot Annui. They've got them, 2 of them. Yuka's heart leapt. The Sky Criers. It must have been them who had fired cowardly on the young girl. They must have been lying in wait from somewhere in the tree line. Yuka wondered what the Kamden were going to do to their captives. No fate would be too brutal for every one of those white-pasted devils, Yuka thought. She looked forward to seeing the women with white smeared all over their faces brought to their knees. She quickened her pace. Ahead of the party was a ring of fire made by torches held by pale, angry faces. It was hard to tell anyone apart. Everyone was either bathed in fiery yellow torchlight or shrouded in black. Lusa pushed through the mob of people barking out in Kamden. Yuka kept close. The 2 men on horseback were entering the great ring of people. Both held torches. Yuka recognized the 2 men as the jailers that had accompanied them that morning. The one with a thick black mustache was holding the end of a rope. He gave a hard tug and brought a large, stumbling woman into the flickering light of the torches. The woman was Yoked. That was certain, though everything else was not. what Yuka had expected. She was old. Yuka could tell the woman had broad shoulders under the thick chaka fur she wore. Her hair was long and white. It was held back by a thick brown strip of leather that was tied around her forehead. What was more that Yuka noticed was that as she was pulled into the light, Yuka could see that the woman had a thick necklace of carved wooden beads. Over her chest, the necklace of beads held a large carved disc of duskwood. The wide disc had a large black and red sangroot seed set into the center with sap. Yuka had seen many of these amulets just like it in the copper shards. This woman, she realized, is a village mother. The younger, lighter-haired jailer had a robe of his own. The woman he led into the ring was younger than the village mother. Her hair was shorter and nut brown. She also wore it tied back with a brown leather strap. The left side of the younger one's face was swollen, and her nose was bleeding badly. She had tears in her eyes as the two entered the ring. The older woman stood straight, but walked with a limp, as her rope was tugged forward. Neither of the women had white pasted over their faces. They're not sky criers, Yuka thought. Yuka heard Lusa curse under her breath. She had followed the older woman through the crowd to the edge of the ring of people. There were shouts on the other side of the gathered crowd. Yuka saw the crowd part once more for Falhurst. The large bearded man looked to have been roused from inside the healer's warm tent. He wore little to guard from the deepening cold, other than a thick undershirt, trousers, and black fur-lined boots. His long gray hair looked loose and bedraggled. Yuka could see a spot of blood on the bottom part of his shirt. The large man's right fist was clenched tightly around the handle of the long, curved blade he had pointed at Yuka earlier. His eyes were locked on the two women before him. Everyone gathered to wait to see what the caravan leader would do. Yuka watched as the big, bearded man took a long, steadying breath. Soft wind whipped snow in and around the ring of people as all waited for the man who led them and what he would say. Falhurst moved. His sudden strike was that of a trained fighter, not a tradesman. The man lunged and lashed out like a fell cat's claw. In one sweeping motion, Falhurst swept the long, curved blade through the throat of the younger woman. The force of the blow knocked the younger woman to the side. She fell to the ground, throwing her tied hands out to stop her fall. The bound village mother cried out and tried to run to the woman on the ground, but was pulled back viciously by the jailer holding her line. Blood. Red under the sun, but black under torchlight, filled the snow around the young woman. She coughed, choked, and spluttered her life away as it flowed from her mouth and torn throat. The village mothers were not the only screams that Yuka heard. Other women, most likely the soft-looking, white-robed women of the caravan, screamed out. Some ran back from the ring of people towards the safety of the tents. Yuka's legs were rock, her heart ice. She watched this young, strong yoke-head woman cut down without a word, without warning, seemingly without any thought. She had not yet moved, but Yuka felt an iron grip grasp her shoulder. Lusa was not looking at her, but held her tighter than a mother would her babe. "Hold," was all she said. Yuka heard the words like she was in a dream. Falhurst began speaking quickly to the mustachioed jailer holding the rope of the village mother. The two spoke fast, and their words were blurred on the wind. Yuka doubted that she would have been able to understand them even if she spoke the Kamden tongue. After a response from the jailer, Falhurst turned to the ring of tradesmen and travelers all around them. His voice broke harshly through the winter wind, and all who had not fled at the blood listened to him intently. Lusa did not wait for Yuka's question. "He is saying that these women were found running down a hill that was above where Annui sat atop her steed. These women were attempting to flee through the thicker forest around them." Falhurst, as he spoke, grabbed at the long-looking spitfire that had been tied to a sling on the jailer's saddle. He held it out for all to see. "He says that this spitfire was carried by the old woman. When she had been caught, the barrel had been warm, and there was still smoke rising from its firing lock." Yuka then heard Falhurst bark out a word that she knew. "Lusa!" Yuka heard the woman curse under her breath once more. "Hold here, girl, I beg you." The woman stepped from the dark ring of tradesmen and into the torchlight. Falhurst spoke quickly and gestured at the woman. The village mother, had ceased her cries. The old woman shook terribly where she stood, and Yuka knew it was not from the cold. The woman had tears streaming down her face, and would not take her eyes off of the now still form of the younger woman. Snow had already begun to pile onto her prone body. Yuka pushed Lusa's plea back to the back of her mind and shoved through the last of the crowd to the front edge of the ring of people. Lusa asked the village mother a question that Yuka did not hear, but she could hear the village mother respond. The wind and murmurs from the crowd made it hard to hear anything. Yuka could only get pieces of what was said by the village mother. Because she called the beast from the sky. You saw the lightning and the snow. Been tracking them for days. Not a white face seen for many days. Never forgive the red wind from the south. Green heart and song. The woman suddenly stepped forward and spat full in Lusa's face. The jailer holding her line yanked on the rope so hard the woman fell back into the snow. She struggled back to her feet and looked to be about to try and spit at Lusa again. The mustachioed jailer grabbed at the handle of a sheathed, curved blade, but Lusa held up a hand, staying him. She stepped away from the village mother and went to speak to Falhurst. The village mother called out after her. Her words were shouted in a voice broken by grief, but Yuka could hear every word this time. You are Yoked, you foul bitch! These savages may kill our daughters without a moment's thought, but if there is any of the Song of the Green left in your heart, you will not let them bring their cruelty to my village. Keep them from our children. Protect my Aklak. The name tore through Yuka like a blade through her stomach. She remembered the old man protecting the children in the village from that morning. Aklak. Yuka ran into the firelit ring. She is the village mother, from the village this morning. Lusa turned and Falhurst shouted something at Yuka. Damn it all, girl. Lusa strode over to Yuka and grabbed her by the arm. Yuka ripped her hand back from the woman and ran to stand by the village mother. She has not white on her face. She would mean us no harm. Yuka, come back from her now. Falhurst was stepping angrily towards Yuka, but Lusa was speaking to him quickly, standing in between her and Falhurst once more. Yuka, get back to the tent. I will explain later. Yuka. The voice came from the village mother. Yuka turned. The tearful eyes of the old woman were on her now. They were soft, and the color of duskwood bark. I have heard your name. Yuka. Lusa's voice was hurried now, panicked. This is not your place. You will need to get away from that woman now. Why would she hurt Annui? How could she? A village mother. Listen to the song, woman girl. A true woman of Yoked is not welcome here. The village mother's tone had become softer. Be silent, you. Lusa barked at the village mother. Yuka would not move. Did you see what Falhurst did? Yuka pointed desperately at the dead woman in the snow. He waited for nothing. Yuka, for the last time. Falhurst had had enough. The man grumbled something and stepped forward to Yuka. The long, curved blade was held tightly in his hand. Yuka saw him approaching. Yuka's mind was suddenly in the deep black without a rope again. She was on a tree branch, seeing the Felcat circle below her. She was facing down the white-painted women with her mother's axe in hand. Yuka's hand whipped out the long dagger that the man approaching her had given to her the night before. She took it from her belt and held it out. No! The voice that shouted had been a woman's, but Yuka had no idea whose it was. In a flash of movement, Yuka's eyes turned from the enraged look on Falhurst's face to the glimmer of brass from the rounded butt of a Spitfire handle. Then all went dark again. And so the trail in front of her curves dangerously once more. Next week, when we see Yuka's next steps, we will see who is her friend and who is foe.